Hey everyone, welcome back, and this video is for everyone who are looking to start with Flutter but have no idea where to start with. Well, you should start with Dart first, of course, because that is the language that you need to understand to even read a Flutter project, forget writing one. But I have never been a great fan of long courses because the length bores me, and I'm more excited to jump into the meaty part of writing my first Flutter application than to go over a very long course that tells me everything there is to know. I'm more interested in those courses only once I've got some progress and I am at a stage where I need to learn more concepts to even proceed further. But to start, I need to know just enough to write my first Flutter application and to be able to understand Flutter code. And if you're a learner like me and also looking to start with Flutter, you might find this video helpful because I am going to tell you about the 9 Dart concepts that you need to learn before jumping onto Flutter. So without wasting any more time, let's get started. Before we start, I need to be sure that you're ready for this video. You should only continue this video if you have some programming experience, like you know about variables, constants, and more importantly, you have some practice with object-oriented programming like C++, Java, so you're comfortable with OOP concepts such as classes, objects, constructors, methods, functions, etc. If you have no idea about object-oriented programming, I would highly recommend not to jump the gun here and start directly with Dart. I mean, you could always do that, but you will always have 1,000 questions about programming in general, and you will have a gap in your knowledge because this video is not about learn programming with Dart. So only continue this video if you have some practice or have taken some classes of object-oriented programming. So number one, and very important one, any Dart program would start with void main, that is the entry point to your Dart application. If you have ever created a Flutter project like this, you would find the same in main.dart as well. Now in the void main, let's print something into the console by using the print statement. Number two, Dart supports following variables currently, which is numbers, which is an int if it's an integer or a whole number, or a double if it's a decimal or a floating point integer. And you can also use num if your variable could be integer or a double, both. Next, Dart supports strings, of course, which can be written either with a single quote or a double quote like this. But you can't start a string with a single quote and end it with a double quote. And of course, we have booleans, which is a variable that takes either of the two values, which is true or false. So if you have a variable called does Pooja like Flutter, the value could either be true or false. But I think we all know the correct answer to that. Before we move on, do you know that we would actually not specify any type and just use var for a variable instead of the types that I just mentioned right now? Dart is actually smart enough to know the actual type of the variable once the value has been set. Let's see that in action. Here we have a variable called I don't know who I am, and I'm going to be setting a variation of values to this variable and check the runtime type of this variable and see how smart Dart is. Now if you print this variable without any value being set, this would print its type as null. So let's give it a string and see if Dart can get that. It does, yay. Now if we give it an integer value, the runtime type would be integer, and if we give it a double value, the runtime type would be double. So that was where if you do not know what type of value your variable is going to be. Moving on, we have list. If you are coming from a different programming language, you might be more accustomed to the keyword arrays, but here in Dart we call them list. So you can create a list of integer either by completely specifying the data type and what this list should contain, like here is a list of integer, or you can also just use var and let Dart figure it out. So of course you can create a list of the same types, but in Dart you can also create a list of different types, such as here is my list that contains an integer, a string, and a double all at the same time. So now you must be wondering, what type would this list be of? So if you have a mixed bag of types like this, you could give your type as list of dynamic. Next we have maps, which is nothing but a key value pair. Have you ever seen a JSON string? That is also a key value pair, where it is a map of someone's name and job, where name could be Pooja and job could be Flutter developer. You could also specify its type as map of something something. Here you have to give two data types, which is what should be the data type of your key and what should be the data type of your value. In this case, we have a map of string and string, but in Dart we are of course not limited to that. We could actually use any type of data types. It could be a map of integer or string, it could be a map of double or string, it could be a map of integer and integer. You get the gist. If you're printing the values, you could print the entire map as a key value pair, or you can choose to print just the keys of the entire map, or just the values of the entire map, or maybe a value of a certain key like this. There are other types also available in Dart like sets, runes, but this is enough to get started with Flutter. So let's move on to the next concept. So number 3. So now you just learned about strings, which I know you knew that already, but let's talk about string interpolation. Now, I don't know which language you're coming from, but you may or may not know about string interpolation. Basically, let's again see how we define a string. So here we have a variable called sentence which says hello Pooja. Now all that is fine, but this value Pooja should come from a variable instead rather than hard coding it on the string. So you should have a variable something like this that will be inserted into your string. Now usually we are habituated with something like this where we use the plus sign to add a string and a variable, but it can get a little messy when there are too many variables in question. So there is another way we could do this in Dart, which is what string interpolation is all about, where you could actually write the same thing like this, which is much more cleaner when read. And if you have an object or a function that you also need to insert into your string, you could also wrap them with the curly braces and insert it into your string just like this. Moving on, we have functions, and I'm sure you know what functions are. It is pretty similar in Dart as well. Like you have a function like this with no parameters, and you have another function like this with parameters. So usually we call these parameters as positional parameters because the position is fixed, which means that if your first parameter is a string and the second parameter is an integer, when you're calling that function, you cannot interchange the parameters and give the first value as integer and the second value as string. Or you can't even skip parameters just like this. But in Dart, we have a solution. We have two more types of parameters other than the positional parameters, which is the optional positional parameter, where if you think one of the parameters is optional and not really required to run the function, you could add that parameter inside square brackets, and when you're calling that function, you can choose to provide the second value or you can choose not to. But something more exciting is the named parameters. So you have this function like this. Now if you wrap the parameters inside the curly braces, now this solves two problems, which is having to remember the position of your parameters, because now you just need the name to provide it the value, just like a key value pair. So here when I'm calling the function, I can write like name colon Pooja and age colon whatever. And of course you can interchange the positions here and the function will work just fine. And the second problem that it solves that all the parameters inside the curly braces are optional. So you can also choose to skip one of the parameters if required. Or you can choose not to provide any values at all. Number 5 is checking for null values. So imagine if you have a function that prints if an item is free of cost or has a price, where this is a function that has a named parameter called price, where it's possible that this value is not provided to this function when we are calling this function, which means that price will be null. And we are checking if price is null, we print free of cost, and if there is a price, we print the price. And it works perfectly as you can see here, but it takes 6 lines of code just to do this simple task. Now in Dart we have a simpler way of doing this with null aware operators. You print the price and just after your variable you put 2 question marks, which is the null aware operators, and you provide a default value. So which means that when we are printing price, if this variable turns out to be null, Dart is going to print the default value instead. Of course, this default value could be of any data type. So this could also be like a final price where if price is null, the default value is 0, which is an integer. With string interpolation, it could look something like this. Number 6. So we reduce the 6-line code to 2 lines with null aware operators, but we can also reduce that into 1 line in Dart with fat arrow functions or arrow syntax. So if we have such functions which have only one expression in that function, we can reduce them into 1 line by using the fat arrow syntax, which is just an equal to sign and an arrow. So now this function becomes void print price, fat arrow, and print statement. But if you have a function like this where there is more than one expression, then you cannot reduce the function into a fat arrow syntax. Number 7, and this is about classes, and since I already told you that you're supposed to know about object-oriented programming and classes are an important part of that, so you should be aware of classes, and this is how classes look like in Dart and how constructors look like in Dart. And when you are creating the object for its class and trying to print one of its variable, it would look like this. If you are coming from C++ or Java or other similar languages, this might be exactly the same as in your language as well. But more importantly is the next one, which is number 8, which is constructors in Dart classes, which might be different than your current language. Like here you see a normal constructor for a Dart class where we are assigning the constructor argument to the instance variable. Now imagine if your class had more than 10 variables and you had to do the same thing for all these 10 variables. But of course, Dart would make this easier for you, where you can remove all these boilerplate code and just write this instead. And behind the scenes, Dart will take care of setting the instance variables for you. But in Dart, you can choose to not even write a constructor at all. That way, Dart will create a default constructor for you. The default constructor will have no arguments, and if we remove the constructor that we just created in our class right here, it will look something like this. And when you're creating an object for this class, it would be like this. After creating the object, you can choose to set the values like this and print it the same way as usual. Or when you have a constructor, you can wrap them up with curly braces and it will act just the same as named parameters of functions where the same concepts apply. You can set the arguments like a key value pair, they are optional and they are not fixed to position. And in Dart, we also have something called a named constructor, where you can name your constructors and give more clarity of what it does, which also means that you can have multiple constructors in a class. Like suppose for our person class, we have a normal constructor, but we also have a named constructor called senior citizen. So now if I have to create an object for a senior citizen, so I would use a senior citizen constructor of the person class. Number 9, which is null check for an object. Now if you don't initialize your object at all and just create a person object just like this, your person object is going to be pretty much null because it was not initialized at all. At this point, if you try to print the age for this person object, you should get an error like age was called a null because person object is null itself. So obviously age is going to also be null. To get rid of that exception, you could use this object null check operator, which is a single question mark. So you're telling Dart that if the object is null, do not proceed the operation further because naturally age is a part of P, and if P is null, age will also be null. And of course, you can also club it with the null aware operator and give this entire expression a default value like this. And that's all the 9 concepts that you definitely need to know before you write your first Flutter application. But of course, that's not the end to the Dart world. This is just a tiny percentage of what Dart has to offer. But once you start with Flutter and get the hang of it and you want to know more about the concepts of Dart, you can go to this language tour that Dart has in its official website. It's great enough. Now if you're ready to jump into Flutter and want to know how to get started with Flutter, I already have an article right here where I had written how to start with Flutter. That should give you the rest of the steps. Let me know in the comments if you feel ready to start with Flutter after this video today. And of course, if you want to connect with me on other social media platforms, you can connect with me here and here to know about my work and my events and behind the scenes. And I'll see you in the next video.